Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. Today in the garage we're going to be installing our Blitz front bumper that you see here on the front of this 2024 GMC Canyon AT4X. So to start things off, there's a bit of disassembly to do. Essentially, you're going to be pulling the entire grille and front fascia assembly off of your truck. We'll start out right here at the top with 4 fasteners. Those are Torx head fasteners, so you'll need to grab, looks like a T15 Torx, and you can work your way across here and get all 4 of these out of the way. You'll then keep that T15 and come over to either side wheel opening. The process is the same no matter which side you're on, and you'll have to do it on both sides. In here, you've got a handful of screws to remove, somewhere between 10 and 12, depending on how far back you choose to go. But ideally, you're coming back pretty much to the halfway point, or really this seam in this wheel well liner. That'll allow you to both drop this down and pull it back out of the way to give good access in behind here. You may notice during this process that we've got kind of this outer trim section hanging down. That's because there's a tab in there that was broken during our initial R&D disassembly, admittedly there. Not to worry, this piece is going to be removed, so if you damage it, it's not the end of the world, but if you want to save all of this stuff without damaging it, wait until you have this fender flare also popped out. You should then be able to access the bolt for that and safely remove it. From there, you can either kind of peel that out from behind this fender flare or pop the flare, which is the next step, which makes it a little easier to release. You will want a pry tool of some sort to pop a plastic clip down here on the bottom of this flare. It's basically right in the center of the 2 tabs that secure this lower section, and you'll just have to kind of lightly press up on it. That will release those 2 while you pull out on the flare itself to separate it here and start freeing up the clips basically back to about the front edge of the marker light up here. From there, if you haven't already, you can lift this up out of the lower lip and then pull it down to access in behind here. Now while we're messing with this flare, I'll point one more thing out here just in case it happens to you occasionally, which we had it happen across the top up here. Some of these clips will pop out of the flare when you're removing it and remain in the fascia. They're easy enough to remove simply by pushing in on the 2 tabs, most of which you can access in from behind here with your hand or a pair of pliers, and then get them popped out there and slipped back into their slotted location here on the flare before this gets reinstalled later on. Once you can get in behind the flare, you can see the 2 black hex head screws here, as well as the location where there would have been one, like we mentioned earlier, holding on this lower trim panel. So that you'll just need a 7mm socket to pull all 3 of those. And then following that wheel opening up, you have one more of those same screws here up top that retains the top edge of this fascia. Again, with your T15, you've got 2 more of those Torx head screws to remove here, where it kind of holds this plastic structure to a metal bracket here. Then even further down in here, you're going to be looking for 2 more hex head style screws. Again, they'll use a 7mm, but you're going to have to use a wrench in this location most likely due to limited space. This is to release the active grille shutter system from this lower cross member. Now moving to the bottom side of things here, you've got 6 more of those Torx head fasteners that need to be removed. However, a few of these are covered up by the factory skid plate, which kind of follows this line here. So that will need to be removed as well if your truck is still equipped with it, and that will allow access to those. Just note, once you pull the outside fastener on each side, it kind of frees up this inner trim section here that held a couple of the clip nuts where we already removed hardware. So those will be free to drop out or be removed as well. Over here on the passenger side, you'll be looking for 2 electrical connectors. These do need to be both unplugged and removed from this lower plastic section. How you do that is up to you. You can get in here with a pry tool and just lift this whole kind of Christmas tree style clip out of there, or they do have a small tab on here that would allow you to slide the connector itself off of this clip. Not really critical either way. The important part is that you get the locking tab pulled back and then press on the thumb release tab here to disconnect those. The second one is very similar, it's just a little bit smaller. It again has the same style locking tabs, and we will just point out that this one is for the front facing camera, so just keep that in mind and use caution with these camera cables during the removal and installation. At this point, you're ready to remove the fascia from the truck. Now for this, you're basically going to be pulling straight out where the fascia meets the fender itself, kind of in this seam, to release the fascia retainer clips, and then along the front, once you have that free, you basically need to pull straight forward because there's a series of clips kind of around this light section as well as out in the grill section over here that all pop pretty much straight out toward the front. Now, if you have an extra set of hands, a friend close by that can help you out with this, it's a good idea to just have them hold the other side while you're doing this so you prevent it dropping all the way off the truck and onto the ground and damaging anything there. If you don't have that and you're doing it by yourself, you can always reinstall a couple of those screws up at the top that we removed first thing, just loose by hand, something to hold it and prevent that from falling. So then, like I mentioned, you're pulling straight out pretty much right here toward the side. And with it freed up to that point, you're just going to start pulling pretty much straight forward to remove the rest of these clips. And like you can see there, when it happens pretty quickly and frees up this entire front assembly. You can then go repeat that process over on the other side. Once that's freed up on both sides, you can then remove those screws up there if you have them in place. And then you've just got 2 pins kind of holding this, so you will have to lift up slightly. And then this whole thing should slide forward and off of the truck. With the fascia out of the way, there's a couple things we'll want to remove up here on the truck before your bumper goes in place. So right now you can grab an 18mm socket and remove the tow hooks on both sides. These are just held in with the 2 bolts out here running through the frame. And it turns out those are actually a bolt and a nut, so you might need a wrench. With the fascia out of the way, we can remove a couple things up here on the truck. So we're going to start with an 18mm socket and wrench to remove the 2 bolts through the frame here that hold each of these tow hooks in place. So you've just got the nut on the inside and the bolt out here. Once you get both nuts off of the inside, you can just support the hook and pull out both of those bolts, which allows that to drop free. Just inside of that tow hook location, you will want to unplug this front active shutter system here on the bottom side of the crash bar. This is going to temporarily be removed with the crash bar and then will be reinstalled later on. Like most of the electrical connectors, this has a small red locking tab and then a center thumb tab that you need to press and then pull down to free that up. As for that crash bar, it's got 3 bolts on each side that'll be removed with a 15mm socket. I already did the 3 on the passenger side so that I can just do these 3 over here and pop this off. And then of course, just make sure you're supporting this when you remove the final fastener. With those out of the way, it should just pull pretty much straight forward and off of the truck. For disassembly on the fascia, we're going to mostly be working from the inside here to access all the hardware and clips that need to be removed. You want to get this obviously somewhere kind of stable and safe where you can work on it without damaging the painted surfaces on the front side. So keep that in mind as you're getting ready to do this step. The first thing we're going to do here is remove the fog lights and their attached wiring harness. That's just a matter of removing 3 of those screws on each fog light with that 7mm socket, as well as the series of clips holding the harness to the fascia. For those, you can use your panel removal tool or simply cut the clips. Since they won't be reused, just use caution there so that you don't damage the harness when cutting anything. So I would advise you to pop some of these clips for the harness first, just so that when you pull the lights, you have some slack to be able to sit these down somewhere. And if you have the tool out, you might as well just get all of these harness clips out of the way. And then here's a better look at the screws holding these fog lights in as we get those removed. And with that hardware out of the way, these should just pull straight back. While you're in here, you can also remove these outer support brackets. There's just 2 screws holding them in at this time, one right up here and then the other that's kind of hard to see, but it's down in this molded cavity right here toward the center. And with that out of the way, you can now access 2 more of those hex head screws down here that need to be removed. During this step over on the passenger side, you just want to be sure to remove any and all wire harness connections and clips right here on that support bracket as well. Once you've done that, the entire fog light harness and light assemblies should be free from the fascia, so we can set these off to the side for now. From here we can start removing some of this lower plastic, so we'll start with the black outer trim sections here. Most of these just have a center locking tab in each of the slotted hole and tab locations here that you can pry up on, get those aligned, and then just apply some pressure to free those up. This one, it looks like you might have to remove that clip nut, or you may be able to manipulate this plastic up and around it. So we'll have to work at that one for just a moment. But some of these are also going to have a small black locking tab or pin, if you will, here, where you'll have to press down on a tab on the inside and then apply some pressure to the clip on the outside and pull that free to separate those 2 sections. So with that clip nut removed and all of those tabs freed up, these just slide right off of both the front and bottom section. Then working across the bottom to remove this lower gray section, you've just got a couple more of those clips that have to be slid out, kind of those retainers if you will, and then several more of those just center tab style clips that you'll have to press to align and then separate the 2 sections. Once you've gotten all the way across and popped all of the gray clips through there, this piece should slide out from under there pretty easily. And this one can be essentially discarded at this time. Now I spun this around briefly just to give you some context of what you're working on next. Essentially this is a look at it with that gray section removed, and the black painted section here is what we're trying to remove from the front fascia next. So for that one, it's very similar. It's just a series of now black clips all the way around the perimeter through here, along with 4 of the hex head screws here through the center. Just like before, once you have all of those clips popped free, these should separate relatively easily, and this piece can be slid out and discarded as well. At this point, we're ready to kind of mark out and make some cuts to the fascia, essentially removing this lower section that you can see here. We typically like to do that by hanging it back on the front of the truck, which is just the reverse order of how it was removed. Again, you just want to make sure at that time you get everything kind of snapped back in. You can always put a couple screws back in the top, and then just make sure that any of those small plastic retainer clips that potentially popped out and got stuck in the headlights or out in the fender flares during the removal get put back in the appropriate location before you throw this back on. When it comes to laying out your cut, essentially what we're going to do is cut straight across just below this body line. We'll give you a measurement in just a moment, as well as remove the entire center section over here. So we're going to start out on the corner just because that tells us where we need to stop here, so we don't make extra work for ourselves having to cut all the way down through this section. Basically what you want to do is follow a 1/4 inch below this body line here, keeping in mind that that's kind of up for interpretation because everybody's measurement might be a little bit different depending on where exactly they place their tape measure. We're kind of trying to go from the bottom of this radius on the body line, but once again, that might vary from person to person, so you can always be conservative. You can always trim more off after the fact once you do a test fit if you find out it's a little too tight or you got a little trimming to do to clean up your line. So keep that in mind. Feel free to do that. It's always a good idea rather than cutting too much and not being happy with the appearance at the end. So with all that being said, we did take the liberty already to set up our laser level where we want it below this line. Basically, that just allows us to have a nice straight line to follow with some tape all the way across. What I have here is some fine line tape. It's just a little more flexible and easier to use when going across these contours, but you can usually get by with some traditional blue painter's tape as well. And then you just got to stay out of the way of the laser, obviously, and follow that line carefully all the way across. Now these laser lines do sometimes get a little bit weird as they come out around a contour, so we did reposition our level one time and kind of remeasured out here, so we were happy with the mark. And then we'll just finish this line off coming all the way across the flare, which you will be cutting as well. From here, you'll simply repeat this process over on the other side before moving to the center just under the grill section. Once you've got those marks on both sides, you're essentially just connecting the two following this body line so that we remove everything that, again, would have been hidden by that black trim section earlier on. Basically everything that's recessed inside of this opening here. So we'll just follow this line all the way around, which also helps to protect it during the cutting process. From there, it's always a good idea to add just a little bit of extra protection. So we'll take some wider tape and just follow this across to hopefully protect the upper painted section here during the cut. Once you have this laid out and taped off in a way that you're confident in and comfortable with, it's time to start cutting. As always, take some safety precautions. At the very least, grab some gloves and safety glasses. This plastic gets pretty hot when you're cutting it if you're using the same tools as we are, so keep all of that in mind. With that being said, we typically just use our cutoff wheel on a grinder to make the majority of this cut, especially the long straight cuts here. We do have a body saw and a smaller air cutoff that might help in some of these radiuses. So use the tools you have available to you there to make the best cut possible. And from there, I'm just going to cut basically both of these outer wing sections and then come in toward the center to finish things up so it's a nice even drop when this section kind of falls off at the end. So when this falls free from the truck, you'll have kind of two pieces, an inner black plastic piece here, as well as the outer section that come off. This is all garbage at this point, so we can just get that out of the way. And then back up on the truck, you're gonna have some plastic pieces hanging down. You're gonna have a couple little tabs that might be left over here. This is all stuff you're gonna wanna come in and trim out and clean up after the fact now. A sanding flat disc on a grinder works really well to kind of just smooth out all of these edges. I didn't actually mention it earlier on, but essentially when I'm cutting, I'm kind of trying to give just a little space below my tape line as well. So leaving about a 1/16 of an inch of plastic material there. that we can once again smooth out with that flap disc as we kind of finish things up for a nice clean edge after this cut. With all that being said as well, I do just want to point out, because you'll see this lower air dam section hanging down here from the factory grill shutter system. We aren't going to mess with this at this time, at least. We don't want to cut any of this, so keep that in mind during this process as well, and make sure that you're leaving all of this intact. Once you have all that cleaned up, the truck is pretty much ready for an initial bumper test fit and any minor final trimming on your cut. You can leave the tape on or take it off, it's really up to you. Obviously with it off, you'll get a better look at what your finished product is going to look like. If you leave it on, any minor adjustments that need to be made can just be marked right on the tape, and then of course you can trim to that line. So keep that in mind. That part is entirely up to you. With this off the truck, the lower grill shutter can be removed by simply pulling 2 screws, one out on each side, again with that 7mm socket. At this point, you'll save the shutter and can discard this crash bar. So now you can move to the bumper itself, which you're gonna have some assembly to do. You can see I skipped ahead on this one a little bit because we have admittedly already had this on the truck, so we can put it through its paces out in Colorado on a quick trip. So I've already got the winch in here. You can see the fair lead in place in the recessed fair lead mount. I've actually got our gray textured logo trim plate here as well. That's just gonna bolt on with Q20 hardware, which will show you a similar trim plate in just a moment. Moving now briefly to actually our Colorado ZR2 front bumper. They're very similar on the inside since the trucks share the same frame platform. So the mounting is going to be really similar and everything in here. But basically all I wanted to show you is the rough dimensions of the winch opening. You've got 4 slotted mounting holes on your doubled up mounting plate down there on the bottom. We've got 2 slotted light mounting tabs in here for your 20-inch light bar. Those are approximately 22 inches apart right there, so keep that in mind when ordering your light bar. And then you're gonna have that 6-hole pattern for that trim plate. So you wanna start off with the trim plate, followed by the light bar, and then get your winch in here, and that's gonna leave you the most room during each of those steps. Then as we move back to the true Canyon front bumper here, you can see you will most likely need to relocate your winch solenoid or control box here. We've got ours offset on a small bracket here. This is kind of a prototype bracket. We do hope to offer something in the future at the time we are filming this video at least, so pay close attention to the website there, take a peek, see if we have that at the time you are ordering, and hopefully we can get you taken care of on that one. You can see as well, now that we're back here, kind of how tight this can get with the light bar and that trim plate, so kind of why that order comes into play and makes sense for getting all those things installed. Now before you throw this up on the truck, now is a good time to throw your factory fog lights back in here on the provided mounting tabs as well. So I've already got one in on this side. These are side specific, so pay close attention to that. When it comes to actual mounting, you've got 2 slotted holes on the mount here. You can line that up with the 2 tabs here on the factory light, and then you'll be installing number 10 button head screws with flange nuts on the back side of those. You'll get those in both hole locations, and then since they are slotted left to right, you can take a peek from the front side and make sure they're centered up, and then tighten them up with an 1/8 inch hex or Allen. Once you have both of those bolted in, grab your factory fog light wire harness. You'll want to route that in behind the winch in here. We'll probably throw a couple zip ties back in here to keep that away from the winch cable, and then you can go up through the cutouts on the side and out to the lights to get those plugged in. And then of course pay attention to that and make sure you get the main harness plug on the correct side, passenger side on this truck, so that you can get that plugged in and functioning later on. Then grabbing your outer wings and the gray accent plates there. This step can really be done at any time, but you can take these, obviously they'll lay over the front of this and line up with the 4 provided holes there, and then you've got black 1/4 inch button head hardware to go into those, much like you'll be using on the gray logo plate on the front of the bumper itself. And then just flange nuts to thread in on the back side here. And then all of your 1/4 inch button head hardware will be tightened up with a 5/32 hex. Now those wings can be bolted on at any time, so you can bolt them on now or after the bumper's up on the truck. I like to do it this way just because it keeps the whole bumper package a little bit smaller while you're maneuvering it around and getting your hardware started, so you've got a little more access on each side, but no big deal, personal preference, up to you there. So getting ahead of myself there a little bit, if you're going to be installing tube work, you actually want to get that on at this time as well, because you're going to lose access to the inside of here a little bit once you have this up on the truck. So that's going to mount using provided holes out here along the top and the front face. You've got 3 per side. It's just going to nest down right on top of those, and you're going to find the black 3/8 button heads to drop through there, along with flanged nuts for the inside. So what you would do is get those started in all of your mounting holes before tightening them up, and then you'd use an 11/32 hex to do so. We plan to run this one without the tube, so I'm just going to get this back out of the way real quick. And with the tube off, you don't want those empty holes on here, so just use those 3/8 button heads to fill those hole locations and kind of black them out there. And I think I might have misspoke when I had the tube. It is a 7/32 hex to tighten those up, just to clarify that one. Once we have the bumper positioned up here in front of the truck, there's a couple things we want to be checking and working on before we bolt this in place. So wiring, one, we did wind up pulling this wire harness down off of the front face here, just with where we mounted our winch controller. That gave us just enough clearance to slip up past this, not crush or damage that wiring. This is also the time we're going to be wiring our winch, or routing the winch wires up under the hood. So depending on where you're relocating that controller to, you may have chosen to move it all the way up under the hood, depending on the wire length you had, and if you had a full relocation kit at that time. So there's going to be some variation there. Since we're tucking it in down here on the bumper itself, we did have to do a little bit of trimming on the factory air dam section that you can kind of see here. So keep that in mind. That's going to vary once again from winch manufacturer to winch manufacturer. And then you might see this extra cable I have here. That is specifically because this is a Warn VR Evo 8S. So that has a wireless winch controller, but you do still need to be able to plug that in to both charge it, or you may want to run it with the wire if that remote dies. Whatever the case may be there, basically we plan to get in here right now and plug this in essentially permanently. So we're going to leave that in there, and then we can plug the actual controller in up under the hood temporarily if we need to get that thing charged up, or once again just run it with the remote wired for any reason. So we're just going to watch those wires and cables and continue to feed those up as we're lifting the bumper into position. At this time, you are going to want to have the provided 10 mil hex head bolts with slightly oversized washers there. Those are going to go right into the factory frame mounting holes, so 3 per side. And we'll slowly lift this into position, getting it lined up inside of the cutout here. Working from the side, you can then kind of snug all 3 of those up with a 17 mil socket to kind of position the bumper a little bit closer to the fascia up top. We do still want to leave them just loose enough that we'll be able to slide this side to side for any alignment needed during the remainder of the install. And you can then grab the 1/2 inch hex bolt with a washer and flange nut. That bolt's going to run from front to rear through the remaining slot down here in the bottom of this face, and then you can take the nut and start it on the back side. You'll want to leave that just loose enough that the slotted lower tie-in can now slide in here both on the frame and up in front of that nut. And then through the 2 slotted holes here, you'll reinstall the factory tow hook bolts, reusing the factory nuts on the inside. With all of that hardware in loose, you can then push up on the bottom of the tie-in bracket and then get in here with a 3/4 socket and tighten up the bolt. That flange nut should grab and pull itself in tight. This is where your side-to-side adjustment starts to become critical, so take a step back and look at the gap between the bumper and the vehicle body and make sure that looks nice and even, and then you can get back in here with your 17 to tighten these, and then an 18 mil socket and wrench down here. Once you're happy with that and you've got that done on both sides, you can grab your wings and get those bolted in. So there is 3 mounting holes out here as well as 3 on the end of the wing. And we're going to be using 3/8 hex heads with washers and of course flange nuts here. So we'll slide that through the wing and into the bumper, and then just have to support this while you get the nut and the remaining 2 bolts installed. With all 3 started, you'll need a 9/16 wrench, possibly 2 if those nuts are giving you any problems at all in there and they're not biting in. You do have a little bit of wiggle room in these, so pay attention to the gaps there and adjust as needed. Make sure your transitions look nice and smooth across all 3 of these surfaces out front, and then go ahead and snug those up. And then of course you'll repeat that process over on the other side. Now in order to tie the top of this plastic active lower air dam section back into the bumper, you're going to use a 1/4 inch bolt with a washer and then a flange nut. Admittedly, I did loosen up those 2 factory tow hook bolts at this time, so you might want to do this just before you tighten those, but that gives you just more room to reach back up in here behind the bumper and pass that bolt through that air shutter, through the bumper, and then you can reach through the opening in the front here to get that nut installed. And then of course you'll tighten those up with a 7/16 socket or wrench. You may have to use an extension to get through here, or even just a small ratchet up through here. Once that's tight, we'll install this lower valance. This is just held in with 4 of those 3/8 black button heads along the bottom. You've got 2 that you'll slide in out here, and you can reach over the side to get the nut installed. And then here toward the center, you'll just reach in with the nut through this cutout, which is actually your winch hardware cutout, but you should be able to slide the nut over there and start those as well. And just like before, these will get tightened up with your 7/32 hex to tighten this and draw this in. From there, be sure to get that fog light wiring plugged back in and tied up if you haven't done so already. Then the only thing you're really left with is trimming up these inner fenders so that they're not hanging down like they would be if all of this factory stuff was still installed here. So the way we did that was pretty simple. We just came from the top edge of this wing and drew a straight line down to kind of this bottom corner of the black bracket you see in here and just extended that out pretty much all the way across. We kind of flattened out as we went across to the side, basically leveling it off with the bottom edge of the frame, which leaves you with a cutaway section like you see here. And then with just a couple bolts through that bracket, we went with a button head on those so that it's nice and smooth on the wheel well side and there's no exposed hardware in there. That should keep that retained pretty well throughout the life of the vehicle. With those finished up on both sides, it's really a good idea to go back through and just double check that all your mounting hardware is tight, all your wires are connected, and that should complete your install. As always, if you guys have any questions about this install or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or just call us at 269-459-8447.